Good. A 17th century depiction of women in Dutch Formosa source material. So I work on the 17th century, and the 17th century is still a big topic in Taiwan studies, whether it's Taiwan history, Taiwan politics too, because there is this element of a Taiwanese identity and tracing one's identity and going all the way back to the 17th century. Now, it's discussed and studied in terms of the trade exchanges, the missionary work that was done, because the missionaries, I mean, the clergy, the Calvinist church came, but so far not much attention has been paid to how these sources talk and discuss and address the female gender. And that's my recent focus. Now, the layout of this class is which sources are available that we can use today when we are interested in the 17th century Dutch presence in Taiwan, which is called with one word, Dutch Formosa. So I will not be giving an overview of when the Dutch first arrived and what did they do. I won't do this. There is material available for this, both in English, I guess also in German, for you to consult. If you need extra articles, I can easily provide these, if there would be interested in a master thesis. But I'll introduce the source material, the translations that are available, and then what kind of work has been done so far on the role and the position of women in Taiwan in the 17th century, and what kind of women have been studied. And this then I will relate to the research I am doing using these primary source materials. If there are questions, you can ask me and you can interrupt, and hopefully I will be speaking slowly enough for all to understand. Okay, so now I have to do the second one. Yeah, this was the previous one. We have, oh no, this way. Yeah. So this is a map, how long it took, about like 1 year from the end of the 16th century to go all the way to, from the Netherlands to the to Southeast Asia first, and from there, from Batavia, they then moved to Taiwan, or Formosa, as it was called. And a critical point was making the Cape of the Good Hope. That's also why it's called the Cape of the Good Hope, because by that time, most of the food, the proviant on the not on the church, but on the ships, was more or less finished. And if they made it to the Cape Hope, then they had fresh water and especially fresh fruits in order to continue the remainder of the voyage and not fall ill, because illness and disease, and I mentioned this for a reason, was rather frequent in the 16th, 17th century, making these voyages. The next one is then one of the maps, which we have Formosa, the island of Formosa, in relation to, because it was important for the Dutch to have, and that's one of the purposes, to have trade with China, which appeared to be rather difficult to achieve. And that was also one of the reasons why in 1619 they made an agreement, a contract with the English East India Company to unite the two Protestants. We have to think also in terms of our European history, against the Catholic Spain and Portugal. We were at the time still separate, to go for the spice trade. But the unity, the defense unity between the English and the Dutch resulted in an advantage for the Dutch, because they didn't really get on too well. And with the extra fleets from the English that they captured, they occupied the Penghu Islands. Yeah, and from the Penghu Islands, they then had their eye on the ships coming on the way from the Portuguese ships coming with their silver from what is now Latin Central America all the way to the Philippines, because the Philippines was Portuguese Spanish. Yeah, they captured both because at the time this was the only way to, that's why they have the term the piracy. This was not very much to the liking of the, at the time, still the Ming Empire. And they said, like, because these also had Chinese chunks within the wake of the Spanish and the Portuguese fleet, and they had to make a detour because they couldn't find their way to Japan. So nicely asked, please do not stay in Penghu. Penghu at the time, since the Yuan dynasty, was also Chinese, under Chinese jurisdiction. And that's when they moved to Formosa, to the island to south, which they already had known about since the 1621, so much earlier. But of course, it's favorable if you can, they decided in 23 to actually abandon the start of a construction of a fortress, move to Penghu, continue building their fortress there, and then being told, there is no time for you to stay here. We'd like you to pack up and go, dismantle all your bricks, because you would not leave these things behind. Also, you needed the bricks, you need something heavy to at the bottom of the ships. And that also explains why we have the porcelain trade, because you came with the silver, because silver in bullion was currency. But once you used the silver, you went back. The spices, they don't weigh very much. Spices are rather light. So you fill the bottom of your ship with crockery, with, and there we have the cracked porcelain too, with ceramics. Otherwise, your ship would float and sink. So yeah, they moved then to Taiwan, and then we have the start of where they say 1624, the Dutch, the VOC. I mean, they were not only people from the Netherlands. This is another element. It's within the start of Protestantism, the move away from the Catholic southern Netherlands, where I in Dutch conference, I can say I'm from the southern Netherlands, which is Belgium. We have a whole number of Europeans who actually joined these ships. Like, for instance, the shipbuilders came from the Scandinavian countries because they had the skill of making ships. Anyways, I'm already moving away from where I should stay. Now, so all this material of these ships, where do we find this? So let's go to then some of the Dutch Formosa sources. What is available? Who are the authors? Yeah. And what is the representation of the female gender? So the question, it touches on the significance of the period for Taiwan history, Taiwan studies. So in general, what information do we have and by whom? It are the materials written by the Governor Generals from the United East India Company or the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. That's why you have the V, the O, and the C. And then you have the 6 Dutch cities who came into an alliance to establish the VOC, and within the logo, you also have the first initial of the city, I mean the harbor city, that was part of the VOC. Yeah, then you have the clergy, because these ships were also furnished with, along the ships came the clergy, and this is then a Protestant clergy, because we have the start of a Calvinist church. And adding, I mean, like, accompanying this clergy were also what would English term would be attendants to the sick, or ziekentroosters, or krankenbezoekers. I mean, when we think in German, which meant usually they were men, another element, who attended the ships and they had like a basic literacy, That's where we also have the term abecedarian literacy. And abecedary means A, B, C, D, E, Rian literacy. So they had basic knowledge of reading and writing, although we do have to mention that the Netherlands did have a high percentage of literacy already in 16th, 17th century compared to the Catholic countries, also because of the vernacularization and steering away from Latin. Yeah. These krankenbezoekers, or these attendants to the sick, they read the prayers, the Bible, and when people were falling ill on the ships and whether or not passed away. They also later on, and this is significant for the material we have on Taiwan, also fulfilled positions either as a school teacher or as a political substitute. And when they were degraded of their duties, they didn't do their duties properly, and more elements can be said about this, they were then degraded to become a soldier. Whereas soldiers who had basic literacy, they were upgraded to a schoolmaster. Yeah, so it's important also within the context of Taiwan, of Formosa Dutch presence, to mention these ziekentroosters or krankenbezoekers. Then the literate merchants, yeah, and of course also soldiers, yeah. So in a man's world, yeah, where the contribution of women, and whether this be Dutch women, European women, indigenous women, and Chinese women, was mentioned, it all in the context of the VOC. And the VOC in Taiwan, we call the Tayouan factory. Now, the word factory was used as the Netherlands was very famous, also within the European trade, as the storage. So they had the bulk of materials, whether this was fish, whether this with the extra of the fish, they then used this to buy salt from the Portuguese in order to pickle. So the Netherlands, within this small part of Europe here, were the storage. And they also continued being the storage in their factories. So they set up a fortress with storage where they stored the goods, which they then could move around within the VOC. And the VOC, and then we have Southeast Asia, we have Batavia, which is currently Indonesia, in Jakarta. Then in 16, where they established themselves around 16, yes, the first time is 1604, 1619, we have done then in the mid-1600s, mid-17th century, it becomes Malaysia, which actually for the timber, the natural resource of tin, which meant actually the departure of the English from Malaysia and their move to South India, to South Asia. Now, see, I don't move away too much with the materials. Oh yeah, with the expansion and the storage. So why was Taiwan interesting for the VOC? Because it was this island where you had a trading between Chinese merchants and Japanese merchants. So it was not that the Dutch arrived and they were there by themselves. There were already Chinese and Japanese communities. Why were they there? Then we have to look at the history of East Asia. So with the Ming Dynasty and the Tokugawa Japan. So there was no free trade the way we know this. It were particular lineages, particular families who had the right, who had the seal to trade with the Chinese, with the Chinese imperial family and as well for the Japanese. But of course, this left a number of more southern, and then we come to Fujian, where later on Koxinga came from, southern coastal provinces of China, Fujian, Guangdong, also southwestern Japan, and that is then Fukuoka, Kyushu. They didn't have these opportunities, so they started to trade illegally. And this is where the Dutch caught in, because with their presence in Taiwan, they bought the illegal Chinese goods, which they then legally sold to Japan and the way around. So, I mean, they were being merchants from, I would say, as in the from early on. Now, so having this, using Taiwan as this storage place, this reflects very much also in the original, the primary source materials. Yeah, and here we have an example of the kilometers of primary sources. I particularly take this one because, I mean, it's not only the handwriting, but I mean, it's very beautiful handwriting though, but it's not always easy to discover, to decipher. But these days is not a problem either, because there are the software programs which have for every century, every decades, the different writings, the different like calligraphies for every letter. So by now we can just upload one of the manuscript texts, and within a few minutes you have a transcription based on the software that reads the different letters. Of course, I need to double check, but it makes, in a sense, doing historical research much easier. But on the other hand, you don't have the touch with the paper itself and going to the archive and sitting there for an entire day. So things goes much faster, but does that mean we learn much faster? Okay, that's a different element. The spot in the middle, it's not my cup of coffee, but it's what we call inktvrat. And it's the ink being eaten away from lying too long. Now, what I discovered in Taiwan, it's we got these little small silver things, and when we don't regularly go through our books, or we have the small brown dots, and that means it's the caca from the cockroaches. So yeah, but this is another thing. That's why preserving materials in Taiwan, because of the subtropical climate, is more difficult. And small anecdote, so this is sometime last year when some indigenous clothes and textiles were discovered in one of the, I think, the Swedish museums. They had a big exhibition. And of course, these clothes were kind of enfermed, taken by either Japanese, because it's from the beginning of the 20th century, either by Japanese administrators, but also by European, and in this case, Swedish ambassadors, I mean, European presence in Japan, visiting the Taiwan colony. When it is lying there, you just take it, right? So misappropriated. And so they have been discovered, and this was by coincidence, by one of the Taiwanese students studying in Sweden. I think it was at Lund. And big exhibition, and are we going to give back these textiles? And the reply from the indigenous, I think it was the Sadiq, was, no, please, you keep it, because it's much better to keep all these textiles in Sweden, where you have a nice preservation climate, and then it is to bring them to Taiwan, because it would just be too expensive, and we rather spend these dollars on different things. So yeah, this is another example that we have in the misappropriation of cultural and tangible heritage due to colonialism. No, the climate here did make a difference in this particular case. And it's quite interesting to know. It's like, okay, you took this away from me and you'll give it back. No, okay, fine, it's ours. Keep it, because that also means we can organize tourism. So, okay. The next one. So here we have, and I use it's a bilingual work from I think 2005, and it's the Dutch Formosan placard book. A placard book. Placards were also decrees that were distributed. But what is interesting is that in the introduction, it gives an overview of how many documents, and this another a little bit more, there were collected, and the categories of the major works, if we want to study 17th century and learn about whether it's trade, whether it's the runaway slaves, whether it's the cargo, the changes of the Governor General's education, church. So the daily records, and we have a number of translations, the Dagregisters, or the daily journals, in which the Governor General recorded on a daily basis, more or less, what was happening in the Taiwan factory. Whether this was in Anping in the south in the beginning, whether this was with the expansion from the from the 1630s to the central part of Taiwan, the central part of Taiwan referring to Erlin and Changhua, because you got the deer hunting fields there. And then finally, by 1642, they move up to the north, because by then, the Spanish already decided to go. Okay, there was some battle, but it was like, I pull my sword and you retreat and then you pull yours. But they still had to completely dismantle the Spanish fortress because this was the mentality. You do this because there were never tunnels underground where the enemy could come back. So they dismantled the whole fort and then rebuilt it. So by 1642, they walked all the way up to the north. The East Coast had some parts too, but it's kind of, it's not a mistake, but it's one of these generalizing things when we say the Dutch were in Taiwan. Yeah, they never had the whole of Taiwan. It was the south, the central part up to the north, and then stretches on the East Coast, where they also engaged in the gold rush. Now, so the daily records give all this. When a cargo came, it starts with how good or how bad the weather was, who were the new arrivals, which expeditions were undertaken, because we have a Governor General, and this was one of the rules, that you built a fortress to protect yourself, because you are there to trade. You have the freedom to carry the gun and use the gun if the counterparty you are dealing with is not willing to give you the goods that you require. Yeah, so that's why. So we have to think back in 17th century. So the Declaration of the Human Rights was not really there yet. So the musket was regularly used. Also think about this. You make this 1 year travel all the way to a different part of the world where the climate is different, and then you encounter people who don't look the same as you, and also to them, you don't look the same as they do. So the kind of antagonism this would have created, this needs to really be taken into account as well. So, and the Governor Generals, if you come with a big garrison with many soldiers, of course you get a nice budget. And for the first couple of years, actually it's not until the 1650s, more or less, that the VOC, the Taiwan factory, starts making a profit. The climate in Taiwan was not very pleasant. But I'll say more to this, especially this evening. So daily records, then the resolutions. The resolutions were, oh no, I miss a piece of text. No, how do I do this back? Yeah. So the resolutions are the outcome of the meetings between the governors, yeah. So, and they are detailed inside, that's why I put the text of how the colonial authorities devised policies to rule the island. Some of them, the resolutions of the Church Council, and that's the one I've been working with, and the resolution of the Formosan Council have been preserved. Other ones have been destroyed, and this was very unfortunate in the 18th century with a fire. Then the other works, the missive. The missive are the official correspondence between the high officials, and that's, again, these have been translated in Mandarin now, to which I will come in a second. And then there are, of course, also private letters. Yeah. What is the significance when we look at the daily records and the missive? We can see the extent to which the policies drafted in the resolutions were later on implemented or not. So this is what we have at our disposal. The next one. Yeah, this is the next one. So the daily journals, or the Dagregisters van het kasteel Zeelandia. It's a fortress, a fortified town, but the terminology used then was kasteel. It's only later on that we have all these distinctions between what's a fortress, what's a kasteel. There are currently four volumes that have been, since the mid-1980s, have been transcribed from the manuscript form and published in the Netherlands. And the Chinese version, the Chinese translation, which initially had been also commenced by, maybe not the daily registers, but definitely the ones from Batavia, by the Japanese, because of the Japanese colonial interest in 17th century Dutch presence in Taiwan, because Taiwan, the stepping stone to the south, to the occupation, Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia in the 1940s, yeah? So at one point, the Netherlands trade embassy was more important than the English one because of the Dutch presence and colonies they had in Southeast Asia. So we have the daily registers, they have been translated, the Missiven, the different volumes, and we notice it has an ongoing translation into Mandarin. The daily registers, for those who want to use the Chinese version, I mean, they have been translated and retranslated and re-edited, which is totally understandable because 17th century Dutch does not, is very scarce with punctuation. And you have very long sentences. And so it also requires some cultural understanding of reading these texts. The Institute of Taiwan History in Taiwan, under their section Diaries, has the entire explanation of translation of the Dagregisters. The Missiven are there in print form and not complete yet, only until 1640. We have the published version in Dutch. And this, I have to mention, the Huygens Institute in Amsterdam, globalized. They also have, I mean, this is the Dutch version, but they also have most of the 17th century VOC materials online that we can search. So we don't have to go to the archive and consult the handwritten manuscripts. Now, so these are two examples of the Dagregisters in Chinese translation, and then the Missiven, the first volume, also in Chinese translation. Now, what if we don't read Dutch and we don't read Chinese? Then so far, what is available is the Formosan Encounter. 4 volumes. the editors are, it's the same group of people. Leonard Blusset, the Leonard, the first A doesn't have the Nathalie and Evelyn Frisch between 1999 and 2010. What the Formosan encounter does, it has taken out extracts and passages and letters that relate to Dutch and indigenous society. That's also why it's published by the Shunli Museum of Formosan Aborigines. Which actually leaves still a lot of information untouched, because apart from the indigenous, the Formosan natives, there is also material on the Han and the Dutch and Dutch settlement, the pioneering settlement. So far, these are the materials to look at. I know I spend a lot of time explaining these, but at least now you know where we can find them, and hopefully the library can also acquire a copy. A number of the works have been translated, like one other work in English by William Campbell, which was one of the Protestant missionaries, and Campbell was he English, yeah, who showed an interest in 17th century, because Taiwan had the first Protestant Calvinist community in the 17th century with the Dutch. This is from the late 19th century, after the opening of the treaty ports, when the Euro-American merchants and missionaries and adventurers found their way back to Taiwan. So William Campbell went to the archives in Jakarta, and he collected a whole number of materials on the 17th century presence and did a translation. Also very useful for, in the English language, becoming knowledgeable about what the Dutch in the 17th century wrote. Yeah. Now, when we are searching for women, what do we have in English? What is done so far? Each of these points I have illustrated. First of all, the first missionary was George Candidius, and in the 1628 he wrote this, what it says here, Discourse and the Kort Verhaal. So it's a short account of the island Formosa in the Indies, which has a translation in English, not entirely, not fully in what I just mentioned, Campbell's work. It has also been published in the collection of voyages and travels. Chinese translation up here in the, I think it's the Taiwan Fengbo in 1994. And it describes his encounter with the first group of indigenous, and these are now known as the Siraya, and they are not the full indigenous, but they are the lowland aborigines. The lowland aborigines, or the Pimpo, means the ones that over the centuries intermarried with the Han, because they were not living in the mountains, but living on the plains. And the Siraya, because they are of mixed ethnicity, have been distinguished from the indigenous, so the ones who are DNA speaking Yuanzumin. They are not Yuanzumin, they are Pingpo, and they have been claiming and putting on many, many court cases. And now the government has 3 years to accept that they are also part of the indigenous, to the Council of Indigenous Peoples, based on the argumentation that their language, they have been very active in revitalizing their language, but I have to be careful in saying this because revitalizing your language and actually on a daily basis using your language are two different things. So the state of Siraya is still very much dormant, but it's a very strong political element for their recognition to be not Han and to be included within the family of the Council of Indigenous Peoples. So Candidius writes all their customs. It's a matrilineal society, also very important that quite a few of the indigenous tribes and communities, it depends on which structure they have, were that we use tribe or community. They were matrilineal. The customs they had, the social order, the priestesses, and then out of this resulted their living quarters, the organization of the households. So this is a lot of information that we received, the way Candidius wrote it. Do we have to take this at face value? That's a different thing. A work that resulted from this by John Shepherd from 1995, The Marriage and the Mandatory Abortion Among the 17th Century Siraya. Why this marriage and mandatory abortion? So first of all, when this also frames in the interest from the 60s that mainly American anthropologists coming to Taiwan had interest in studying Taiwan society, and it was interest like Hillgates, Arthur Wolf, the Mesquil, the Mesquils were different. Arthur Wolf, Robert Weller too, the interest in Taiwan society and the marriage patterns, the adoption patterns, and the relation to religion and the ghost. So this is your typical anthropological topic. And within this, of course, comes also the interest in earlier on because of the indigenous. They come across the indigenous, not everybody is Han in Taiwan. And the mandatory abortion, this was one of the observations. We also see this in the research looking at women, that with the Siraya, with whom the Dutch had the most contact, so there was an abortion until a certain age. They say until the age of 35, then one could have one's first child. Now we have to also, it's not a pinch of salt we have to take this with, but we have to put this in the context. It's not necessarily until age of 35. It could be a cycle, which 35 cycles. So most likely will be younger because people also in 17th century didn't have this long lifespan the way we do now. So first, wow, until 35, how did they do this? Okay, this mandatory abortion, we have material, it's the massage and then certain portions, certain herbal drinks. But of course, and these were priestesses, again, where women appear, priestesses who conducted this matrilineal society. The priestesses were also taking the part of the clergy. So we don't need them. We don't want them. We make sure we get rid of them. And they did, the Dutch and the clergy. So, and these are then three of the articles or book chapters, Nathalie Everts on the Siraya concepts of marriage in 17th century Sinkan. So Sinkan was the village where they encountered the Siraya, where you also have the deeds later on, the Sinkan manuscripts. She did another article. This is also quite interesting. At one point, they banned all these priestesses, put them in the Shaoliocho, so the Lamay Island, and basically blocked the cave and they suffocated. Okay, fine. Dutch didn't do nice things, but this is not I mean, how would we say this? We are in the 17th century and you enter on foreign territory, you act as if this is your place. These are the bad things about colonialism. We need to mention them. Then Leonard Blusset, the eclipse of the Inips. Inips is the name of these priestesses. The Dutch Protestant mission and the persecution of the native priestess. So I can provide all these articles. This is a very nice read and very kind of informative. But if we look at the research being done on women in the 17th century, this is one big aspect of it. And then the focus is not on the Dutch women, it's also not on the Chinese women, it's on the indigenous women and the relation based on the material that the Dutch left behind. Mm-hmm. The next one, yeah, this is a visit to Malacca, to Penang in 2011 with some of my students in the St. Paul's Church, where we stumbled and we were not expecting this. We came across a tombstone and the English translation, Joanna 6, who was born in Taiwan and the wife of Jacobus Pedel, one of the Dutch merchants in Taiwan. And afterwards he became a Santander, a harbor master for Malacca. We were very much surprised. Taiwan identity, we see Taiwan outside of Taiwan, 17th century. I mean, really, we were not expecting to see this, making this visit. But again, it's an example of where do we find women in the 17th century. So we have the migration of Dutch women after they left Taiwan in the 1660s. To other factories in Southeast Asia. Another element is the literature. And this is the Reverend Antonius Hambrook, who parts with his daughters, because this is with the siege of Koxinga in 1661, and he self-sacrifices himself. No, they are, and then this leads to the author Noms, Jacobus Noms, to write, Johannes Noms, not Jacobus, who writes a tragedy, een treurspel. And that treurspel finds its entrance within. This is the original, and it has been published in English translation and Chinese translation too. So this is some of the aspects of the literature where we have also some grasps of how the, in this case, then the Dutch women are being represented. Final one, stories of the marital ties, and this is then the marriages between Dutchmen, Han Chinese and indigenous, of which I'll have much more information this evening, unless we still have some time today. Then, of course, the romance, the Scheepsjongens van Bontekoe. This is a Dutch TV movie, and it's the wreckage. I mean, you call it the sinking of the one of the vessels, the Bontekoe. With Bontekoe was the name, not of the vessel of the ship, but the name of the captain. I mean, it's a fictional story, but it's kind of the Pocahontas. But the Dutch boys come across the beautiful local girl, and then they have all kind of adventures during their shipwreck. But it's the way that the indigenous woman is being represented. It's also part of, I mean, I'm elaborating here, but when we look at, for instance, the movie, the cinema, so some of you may be interested in Taiwan cinema, how from the 50s all the way through the 90s, you can actually do a study of how the indigenous woman, so the indigenous maiden, the Aboriginal maiden, is being represented. And she is also the one who then marries the northern engineer in some of the 1950s movies. And it's all this foundational myth of the nation building of Taiwan. And she's the one who dons her traditional dresses, wears the chipa, becomes an elementary school teacher, speaks fluent Mandarin, and he's the northern engineer. So it's the Pocahontas story, these foundational myths who actually played within the Taiwan cinema, if you look over the development how the indigenous woman is being represented, and then how that contrasts actually with from the 1990s, when you have indigenous writers themselves writing and representing their society within Taiwan and their culture within Taiwan history. A latest thing I found out, and I only found out actually yesterday when I was fine-tuning the PowerPoints. This is from 2020, and it's kind of a manga. It's about the deer hunting, fine, but again, the traditional role in which the indigenous girl is being presented. There, she has to put on some clothes. She quickly does this, you know, and then there is the domestic organization who works in the field and who doesn't. This is also downloadable. So we don't, I mean, it's an online accessible. Yeah. The final one, so the final one, I'll add the article to it, is the Dutch Princess of the Eight Treasures. And this is a fabricated story about this particular Dutch princess. The 17th century information is correct, but the Dutch girl somehow is inserted. And that's where I said the Dutchification of the past has been aiding and reinforcing, also playing parts in the Taiwanese identity. Now, if we search for all these women, what is the contextualization? We have, of course, the interest in the local customs of the indigenous encountered. Why? Because it's the clergy. We have strategies of social and moral control, which have to be eradicated when they are indigenous. It has to serve colonial rule. Then the migration to the VOC region. That's the tombstone we came across. The inter-ethnic relations and the indigenous female, the settlement of the Dutch Calvinist community and the women there. And then, of course, also the teaching of the Siraya language, the local languages, later on Dutch, and the evangelization. So education was not only for boys, also indigenous girls were being educated, because you have to set up education, was religious education. Why was it important? Because if you wanted, within the Dutch role of pragmatism, if you wanted to marry a Dutchman, he needed to be baptized. So the purpose was, initially the idea, and this is with Batavia, was we want to establish a white Calvinist community. They had to steer away from it because they realized it's not going to be possible. And now I'm going to say what I will say more this evening, because of the high mortality rate of the white men. I mean, we have to talk in the new racial terms now. Caucasian is now white. The high mortality of the European males and the females, the women did not really come to East and Southeast Asia until, let's say, the 19th century. So intermarriage had to be inscribed within colonial rule. It was gradually, but it definitely was there. So you also educate the girls. And then the folklore and the popular culture, which serve the Taiwanese identity. So what are our observations? The focus on indigenous women and their social practices. They are in control of local society, and they remain this to a certain extent. And they are companions to the Dutchman, but in the context of as colonial subjects. Whereas the information we have so far on Western women, Western Dutch women, they are part of the pioneering settlement, and we also find them in the migration afterwards. Now, today, not too much has been written about the Dutch women. The Chinese women is fairly limited. And the indigenous women have received most of the attention. Now, what am I then going to do? Because I see the time is going pretty fast. I picked up the daily registers. So the Dagregisters and the daily journals. And yeah, so this is an Excel sheet I made. I went through the index. And of course, the index is never complete, but I started, rather than doing everything online and doing a keyword search, I took the published paper copy index and I searched for all kinds of terms that could relate to women. Now, of course, whenever there is a female name, a name of a juffrouw, I mentioned this, and this from 55 till 62, these are a lot of women because you see by then Taiwan is being lost to Koxinga, so these women have to depart. The D and the E is the folder in which their name is being mentioned. And then I looked at the items. They also have a list of items, een zakenregister. I just, like for instance, afgoderij, okay, this is still in Dutch, afgoderij, which means like, afgoderij is like superstition when you pray to not God. Hedonism, heidense, begrafenis is funeral, because women also die. Hoererij means whoring, what prostitutes do. Then overspel, it's adultery, and incest. Incest, I don't need to explain. Huwelijk means marriage. Kinderpokken means the kinder disease, the pox. Chicken pox, we would say now, but chicken pox in 17th century, you 9 out of 10, you did not survive chicken pox. Mandarijns vrouwen means women of Han, Chinese women. Then court, fever, one of the regular Pasen, Easter, because you have to then go to church. Slaaf en lijfeigene, slave, female slaves also came. Then testament means a will, very important. Verbanning means you being banned because you did something which was not acceptable. Verkrachting means rape. Weeskamer, and weeskamer means, this is a very typical thing. It means weeskamer is the orphanage. But they considered as being the first banks in Taiwan. Because when a child lost his or her parents, then the belongings went to the orphanage, and if the child did not have a guarantor, then the state, means the VOC, the company, became the guarantor. And they collected and they used the money, like the inheritance, as a bank for lending money to the Chinese merchants, who then, of course, had to pay back with interest. So the weeskamer, actually, in the 17th century is the predecessor of the banking system later on. Yeah. So each Dagregister has terminology, has references to the weeskamer, and then also zwangerschap. What I don't have in here, it's the tuchthuis voor vrouwen, means you call that in English, the women's prison. The working house, I think, is the term you use in English. So I looked at those, and then, of course, together with students, we go through the terminology, and then there's the discussion, and then that will result then in a publication. And I think this is one of the later, the last, the two more. So these are some of the examples I have come across. So the first one is an example of this abortion, where this child is being aborted already 7 months old, and where they see evidence of poisonous potions. So, which then gives within this passage, because this is the translation I did in English, they gives the term of the midwife, vroedmoeder. Now, vroedmoeder is not being mentioned in the index. So, since the Dagregisters are online, I can type in the keyword vroedmoeder, give that command, and find more references where where childbirth is being mentioned. Yeah, so that's why this is a pilot study where I use that terminology in order to work then with a bigger corpus. And I tend to limit myself to Taiwan, and hopefully I can find some nice things. Yeah. Okay, yeah, then this is about the legal thing, and I'll talk more about this evening, but I can quickly say that actually the legal system that the Dutch applied in Batavia and later also in Taiwan as well, it was not based, race made no difference. It was who was part of the company. So the Dutchmen, their indigenous women, their slaves, their children, including the illegitimate children, they were part of the company law. Whereas the foreigners, the Chinese, even the Chinese were working for them, or the other Europeans, because that was the enemy, right? So you're not going to or the slaves, or the slave girl who became pregnant with one of the Dutchmen who kind of liked to sleep with her, or way around, it doesn't matter. Now, they were tried when it came to punishment with a court system, a different court system. And why is this important? Because first of all, you have a high mortality. So quite often the men passed, the European men passed away, but he was survived by his wife, indigenous wife, who married, became Christian, and she of course inherited, whether it was only a trunk with some clothes in, because we didn't travel with several suitcases. One trunk had our costume and maybe a tin or a silver jar, but that was property, that was inheritance. So that's why they soon realized we are not going to establish here a white community with only white people in Batavia, and that was going to be the same. So we have to include the local population, and the whites, the children, they inherit, so they become part of the company law, because then the property stays within the VOC, yeah? So this also gives us the different role that they encounter to Southeast Asian women, and they came across the same year in Taiwan, yeah? So that's why. Now, where is the second one, the torture thing there? Yeah. So, okay, the wife of the surgeon, she got upset with the female slave and she basically killed her. Now, the female slave was part of the family. That means she did not have the right to kill her. If the female slave was not part of the family, or it was the slave of a slave friend of some other, she could kill them. Because the female slave, or that any person was not part of the company, means the VOC, but because she was part of the family, the Dutch woman went into the wrong. And that's why she also needs to come to the company court and not so that's why. And she said, oh, but I thought I could just, I thought the murder was only a fine, So, okay, it has to be further discussed. And then also these are some of the constructions they need to make. And the final one, yeah, we have the funeral, the passing away. Yeah, adultery should be to the next one. Straatschenderij. You couldn't swear on the street. You couldn't run around drunk and hit people. It was serious crime, because Calvinist, you have to be very serious. You can't smile, you can't laugh. During the weddings, you can't sing and dance. That's why quite a few in Batavia ran away to the Catholic Church, because the Portuguese had been there before. And then, of course, the overspell. Overspell is an element that plays, and it's referred to in terms of the indigenous community in Taiwan, but also with Dutch. And the last one, the rape, cases of rape, the women workhouse. I also collected the word tear and traan but it's not tearing because you are sad. It's actually levertran. It's levertran. It's from the whale. it's kind of what you eat in order to. It's very potent and it's very strong for you. Then the erfenis and the inheritance. So for instance, here misunderstanding about the Chinese, the lack of inheritance deeds. So administrative matters being discussed. These are the daily journals. I haven't looked yet at the Missive nor the resolutions, but I did look into Kerkboeck, and Kerkboeck are the church minutes. And then we get a different kind of information, like for instance, when every single person who came to Taiwan and wanted to work there, or any factory, any VOC factory, needed 2 letters of attestation. So you needed a letter from your, usually this was the pastor, that you behaved properly, and also from the captain of the sea, from the sea captain. And if you did not bring these letters, or if you were refused, it's like now a visa, it's like entrance visa at this time, letter of attestation. Some want to improve their life, and he has the intention to marry a native woman. He comes back. This is Hans Volland. Yeah, Hans Volland comes back later on because marrying the native woman doesn't really help him. He continues running around at night. And then, yeah, so here is another example. What I need to say too is that the church remained extremely important, more significantly so than, for instance, when it comes to the marriage than in the Catholic Church. So in the Catholic Church in the 17th century, it's okay, it's a sacrament, but the Protestant Church kind of does not recognize marriage as a sacrament. But in the colonies, they realized the church had more say, which meant that if you as a Dutchman wanted to marry an indigenous woman, a local woman, that she needed to show, and that's why this evangelical education is so important. She needed to show, I mean, the one went in hand with the other, she needed to show the basic understanding of Christianity. So she had to go to school. That's why you have education for the girls. Secondly, from the 1642, we see a change from Batavia, the headquarters, regarding the language policy. And you need to start, more emphasis is given to Dutch. So before, like the catechisms and were translated and were educated in the local languages. That's why we now in this revitalization of the Siraya, because gospels were translated, glossaries were made, catechisms were translated. But from the 1640s, we see the expansion also of the VOC in Malaysia, with the English moving away. And but also they realized in Batavia, this is another aspect, that the Dutch language did not gain the ground they expected or were hoping the Dutch language was having, especially within the families where you had where actually the house slaves were looking after the children, and they were continuing to speak either Malay or also Portuguese. And this kind of put like the administration on the back of their heels by saying, oh, we are losing the Dutch language. We already given in by including, being inclusive. And now, you know, the Dutch language is not being further used. So they decide from now on, everything has to be in Dutch. The news, yeah, change the policy. The news also filters down to Taiwan. This creates problem among the clergy, because they say, look, for all these years we are doing this best, we have been learning these local languages, and now we have to start teaching in Dutch. But what it means with the marriage is that if you want to marry an indigenous, and the darker the color, the more emphasis they put on it. The racial hierarchy was put strongly in place as well. The basic of the instruction in Christianity, and they also need to be able to speak Dutch. So they also need to show a certificate that they can speak Dutch. And this was implemented in the 1640s in Batavia. Okay, the extent to which this was totally followed up or not, okay, we don't know, but at least this is the implementation of the language policy, and where the church is then also very important, because it was the church who actually kind of demanded they need to be able to understand and be baptized, and also the language, because vernacularization, the mass was not done in Latin, the mass was done in Dutch. So I think these are some more widows and wills, the will very important, and then some of the references. And thank you very much, because I spoke for an hour and a half at least.